The sun had just begun its slow descent when the final act of our story quietly unfolded. A golden light stretching across the yard, touching every corner of the place that had nearly slipped out of my hands. Standing there, looking at the ranch I had fought so hard to reclaim, there was a strange mixture of exhaustion and peace resting inside me. For the first time in weeks, everything was still. No HOA members lurking near the gate, no threats taped to my door, no auctions planned in secrecy. Just silence. And in that silence, the truth felt louder than ever. Everything they had tried to take from me had only made me more certain of what I was meant to protect.
What started as a simple trip away ended as a battle I never expected to fight, a conflict against people who believed authority gave them the right to rewrite someone else's life. They had underestimated me, underestimated how deeply the ranch was tied to everything I was. But even now, with victory in hand, winning didn't feel triumphant. It felt necessary. It felt like standing up so that no one else would be trampled the way I nearly was.
The full scope of what happened hit me the moment I stepped inside the old barn. The dust, the smell of hay, the tools still hanging where I left them weeks before. Everything was as I remembered it, except for one thing. The security camera light is blinking, a reminder of the night they broke in. A reminder of how easily things could have gone differently. I found myself stopping in front of the feed room door. That was where the HOA president had tried to stage evidence. That was where she tried to write the ending she wanted. And now, standing there, I realized how important the truth was, how important it always had been.
People say justice is slow, but for once, it felt almost swift. Within days of exposing the HOA's actions, the fallout rippled through the entire neighborhood. Homeowners who had once voted blindly began demanding transparency. Meetings that used to end with smug smiles now ended with anger directed at the board. The president, the same person who once marched around as if she owned every inch of the community, found herself stripped of authority. Her position dissolved, her influence gone. Watching it happen wasn't satisfying. It was surreal. Someone who had spent years deciding the fate of others now had to face the consequences of her own choices. But the biggest impact wasn't on the HOA. It was on me. For years, the ranch was simply a place I lived, a place I maintained, a place tied to childhood memories. But this ordeal changed the meaning of everything. I began to see it differently. Less as property and more as heritage, more as proof of the life I built, the quiet resilience that kept me going. And that transformation didn't happen in a dramatic moment. It happened with the little ones, fixing the fence posts myself, clearing the paddock, taking long walks at sunrise, repainting the old barn door. Each task reconnects me to the land that had almost been taken away.
In the evenings, I'd sit on the porch with a cup of tea and just listen. Coyotes far off, horses shifting in their stalls, wind brushes through the trees, the kind of peace that can't be bought or granted, only earned.
But victories, even the quiet ones, carry weight, and mine came with long-term consequences I didn't expect. For weeks after the incident, neighbors approached me with their own stories. Violations were issued unfairly, fines that made no sense, meetings where their voices were drowned out. It was as if my stand pulled back a curtain that had been closed for far too long. People began asking for help, how to document misconduct, how to protect their rights, how to resist when pushed into corners. And every time someone stopped me on the road or knocked on my door, I felt something shifting. I wasn't just a guy who fought to save his ranch. I had accidentally become a symbol of resistance in a place ruled by fear and paperwork. Wasn't a role I ever asked for, but it was one I understood.
So I helped. Not because I wanted to become some neighborhood leader, but because I knew exactly how it felt to stand alone. And if my experience could keep someone else from facing the nightmare I did, then maybe all of it. The stress, the anger, the long nights planning my next move meant something.
Soon, the community transformed. Meetings were no longer dominated by the same handful of people. New leadership emerged, calmer voices, fairer minds, people who remembered they were elected, not crowned. Rules didn't disappear, but they became reasonable, transparent, logical. Violations were reviewed instead of rubber-stamped. Hearings became actual hearings, not formalities used to intimidate. And slowly, the shadow that once loomed over the neighborhood began to fade.
Not completely, because power always leaves traces, but enough that people felt the difference. But the greatest impact unfolded within me long after the noise had faded. Something deep shifted. My tolerance for mistreatment, my patience with injustice, my willingness to stay silent. I had spent too many years letting things slide, thinking conflict wasn't worth the energy. But this ordeal taught me something life-changing. Silence isn't peace, it's surrender. And once you break that silence, once you take a stand, it becomes impossible to go back to who you were before. The first major test came 3 months later. A developer approached, offering to buy a large portion of the neighborhood for a revitalization project. On paper, it sounded beneficial. But the contract was predatory, disguised with legal jargon meant to confuse the average homeowner. Most people overlooked the clause allowing eminent domain style removal if they declined improvements. The same tactic had been successful in other regions because no one bothered to read the fine print. But I recognized the pattern immediately. I gathered documents, analyzed the phrasing, reached out to a property rights attorney and called for an open review meeting. What followed was a room full of people who, months earlier, wouldn't have questioned authority, but now came prepared, alert, determined not to be blindsided again. And when the developer realized the community wasn't going to sign quietly, they withdrew. At the end of the meeting, one of the older homeowners came up to me, placed a hand on my shoulder, and said, "Because of what you did, all of us look twice now. We don't just trust, we verify. You taught us that." I didn't know what to say, but those words stayed with me long after the room emptied. Life didn't become perfect. It rarely does. But it became grounded, stable in a way it hadn't been for years. And every improvement, every small victory, traced back to a single decision, refusing to let someone take what was mine. The ranch became a gathering place again. Barbecues, community meetings, quiet evenings with friends. Kids ran through the fields, neighbors brought over pies, and the laughter that filled the space reminded me why I fought so hard. Not just for land, but for belonging, for dignity, for fairness. One evening, sitting by the fire pit, I found myself thinking about the HOA president, about how her actions spiraled into something far bigger than she ever anticipated. I wondered if she regretted any of it, if losing her power made her rethink how she treated people, or if she simply blamed everyone but herself. I didn't know the answer, and for the first time, I didn't care. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about letting go of the desire for the past to be different. And I had finally reached that place. The long-term impact wasn't just on the neighborhood or the ranch. It was on how I viewed life moving forward. I became more protective of my rights, more aware of the systems around me, and more careful about the authority people claim. But I also became more empathetic, more willing to stand up not just for myself, but for those who didn't know how. The biggest takeaway: you don't truly know your strength until someone tries to take away what you love. People can underestimate you, misjudge you, mistreat you, but they cannot define you unless you let them. The ranch was once a silent piece of land. Now it's proof that one person standing their ground can shake an entire system, expose corruption, and inspire change far beyond their fence line. And the final impact, the one that surprised me most, is this. I'm no longer afraid of losing the ranch, because I know now that I can fight for it. And I know that I will, every time, without hesitation.